Welcome to today's deep dive,
Oh, yeah?
where we're going to be looking at Africa's place
Oh.
in this new world order everyone keeps talking about.
Yeah.
You know, we've got some really insightful research to unpack from Dr. Zamani Saul.
Okay.
He's a leading voice in the African National Congress,
Mm-hmm.
and he's arguing that Africa has a chance,
Yeah.
maybe its biggest chance ever, to finally break free from centuries of exploitation and shape its own destiny.
Wow.
I mean, that's a powerful statement.
Yeah, it is. It is. What's so fascinating about this moment
Right.
is that it's not just about
Yeah.
which country has the most money or the biggest army.
Mm-hmm.
This is about
Yeah.
like a total reshaping of how the world works.
Uh-huh.
And Africa is right at the center.
Okay. So before we get into that,
Right.
maybe we should do a super quick geopolitics 101
Sure.
for any of our listeners who might be new to this.
Okay.
It can seem kind of intimidating.
Yeah.
But really, it's just about understanding how geography impacts global power, and that power, well, it's constantly shifting
Oh,
all the time.
the giant game of risk, right?
Yeah.
You know, countries are always making moves, forming alliances,
Yeah.
trying to secure resources and influence.
I love that analogy.
Yeah.
So for a long time,
Mhm.
that game was dominated by two main players,
Okay.
the U.S. and the Soviet Union.
Right.
We had that whole Cold War era
Right.
where they were locked in this tense standoff.
Right. And even though it was a scary time,
I mean, it was.
there were a few things that kept those tensions from boiling over into a full-blown global conflict.
Like what?
Well, obviously, the big one was the threat of nuclear war,
Yeah.
right? The idea of mutually assured destruction, or AMAD, as it was called.
Yeah.
Pretty powerful deterrent,
It's a good thing cooler heads prevailed.
definitely. And on top of that,
Uh-huh.
both the U.S. and the Soviet Union were experiencing economic growth.
Mm-hmm.
So there was less incentive to fight over resources.
Right.
Plus,
Yeah.
you had this whole network of international institutions, like the UN,
Yeah.
that helped to create some semblance of global order.
Okay, so fast forward to 1991, the Soviet Union collapses.
Right.
And it's like the U.S. wins the game of risk.
Yeah.
They're the undisputed superpower.
the lone superpower.
And, right.
Well, not quite.
Oh,
Not quite.
okay.
While the U.S. was enjoying its moment in the sun,
Mm-hmm.
another player was quietly building up its forces.
Oh, I see where you're going with this.
Yeah.
China.
China.
This is where things get really interesting.
Yeah.
China, under Deng Xiaoping, adopted this brilliant strategy of bide and hide.
Yeah.
It was like they were flying under the radar
Mhm.
while transforming their economy at this incredible pace.
Classic example of playing the long game.
Yeah.
In 1980, China accounted for just 2% of global output.
Wow.
By 2019, that number had jumped to almost 20%.
That's incredible.
Yeah, they zoomed past
Yeah.
economic powerhouses like Japan and Germany
Wow.
to become the world's second largest economy.
Mm-hmm.
Some experts even argue
Yeah.
they've already surpassed the U.S.
Really?
in terms of purchasing power parity.
Wow. That's mind-blowing.
Yeah, and it's not like they're just pumping out cheap products anymore either.
No.
China's pouring resources into cutting-edge technology
Yeah.
like artificial intelligence,
Uh-huh.
quantum computing,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
and renewable energy.
So they're not just aiming to be a factory for the world.
Right.
They want to be a global innovation hub.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Dr. Saul really highlights the strategic brilliance
Yeah.
of Deng Xiaoping's bide and hide approach.
Right.
Allowed China to avoid direct confrontation
Uh-huh.
while building up its internal capacity.
Yeah. But that raises a question.
Oh, yeah.
Now that China is a major player,
Mhm.
how will it use that power?
Right.
Yeah. And how does this all impact the rivalry with the U.S.?
Right.
Because it feels different than the Cold War.
It is.
Yeah.
It's less about clashing ideologies and more about this struggle
Yeah.
for economic and technological dominance.
You're absolutely right.
It's a new kind of rivalry
It is.
with much higher stakes for everyone,
Yeah.
but especially for a continent like Africa,
Yeah.
which has a long history
Right.
of being exploited by both the West and the East.
Let's talk about that military aspect for a second.
Okay.
Because China's military spending has been increasing significantly,
Yeah.
but it's still less than the U.S.
Yeah.
Is this something we should be worried about?
It's definitely something to keep an eye on.
Okay.
Even though China's military spending
Yeah.
is still dwarfed by the U.S.,
Right.
the rapid modernization of their military
Uh-huh.
is a clear signal of their ambition to become a leading force on the world stage.
Okay.
And that has made a lot of China's neighbors nervous,
Yeah.
especially in the Asia-Pacific region.
So how does all of this impact Africa?
Yeah.
Dr. Saul points to some interesting findings
Okay.
from the Pew Research Center. Mm.
Showing that many African countries view China's influence more positively than the West's,
That's interesting.
which seems counterintuitive,
It does.
given Africa's history with colonialism.
Yeah.
What do you make of that?
Well, it's complicated. On the
Right.
one hand, you have China
Yeah.
pouring investments into infrastructure projects across Africa,
Mm-hmm.
but we have to look closely
Uh-huh.
at the terms of those investments.
Oh, okay.
Are they truly beneficial in the long run?
Yeah.
Or could they lead to new forms of dependency?
Right. It's about making sure Africa doesn't just swap one exploitative relationship for another.
Exactly.
Dr. Saul is very clear about that.
Mm-hmm.
But before we jump into the challenges and opportunities for Africa in this new world order,
Yeah.
maybe we should take a step back
Okay.
and consider the historical context, because it's impossible to understand Africa's present
Uh-huh.
without acknowledging its past.
You're absolutely right. The legacy of exploitation in Africa.
From the transatlantic slave trade to European colonialism
Mm-hmm.
casts a long shadow.
It does.
I mean, for centuries, a continent was systematically plundered of its resources and its people,
Right.
and that history continues to shape the way Africa interacts with the rest of the world.
It's a stark reminder that we can't achieve true equality without addressing the injustices of the past.
Right.
But what I find hopeful about Dr. Saul's work
Yeah.
is that he doesn't dwell on the past.
Uh.
He sees this moment as an opportunity,
Yeah.
a chance for Africa to finally break free from that cycle of exploitation.
And a big part of that, he argues,
Okay.
is embracing what he calls equitable multipolarity.
Equitable multipolarity.
Yeah.
I like the sound of that.
It's essentially a world where power is more evenly distributed, and all nations, including those in Africa,
Yeah.
have a genuine voice and agency.
Okay. I'm hooked.
Okay.
What exactly does equitable multipolarity look like?
So,
How does it play out in the real world?
right. So imagine a world where the price of your smartphone isn't dictated by, trade wars between superpowers,
Oh, wow.
but by fair competition among African nations with thriving tech industries.
Okay, that's a powerful image.
Yeah.
So Dr. Saul is basically saying with equitable multipolarity,
Yeah.
Africa would have more control
Yeah.
over its own resources and its own destiny.
Exactly. And that control would translate into tangible benefits
Okay.
for people all over the world.
Okay, so including you.
Yeah.
Let's dive into what that looks like.
Sure.
Dr. Saul outlines 4 key attributes
Sure.
of this equitable multipolarity.
Uh-huh.
The first one is a commitment to shared growth and prosperity
Right.
for all nations, not just the wealthy few.
So it's not about extracting resources from Africa
Yeah.
and leaving the continent behind.
No.
It's about actively supporting Africa's industrialization,
Okay.
investing in education and infrastructure,
Mm-hmm.
closing the digital divide.
So instead of just buying raw materials from Africa,
Right.
countries would be helping Africa develop its own
Yeah.
manufacturing and tech sectors so it can compete on a global scale.
Right.
That seems like a win-win.
Absolutely. And that leads to the second attribute,
Okay.
reforming global governance institutions.
Okay. I've always wondered about those organizations,
Like what?
like the UN Security Council, the World Bank.
Right.
Do they really represent the interests of all countries?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
And it's one that Dr. Saul grapples with in his paper.
Okay.
He argues that these institutions need a major overhaul
Yeah.
to be truly inclusive and represent the interests of all nations,
Right.
not just the historical power brokers.
So giving African nations a seat at the table when decisions are being made that affect their future?
Exactly.
I like that. What about the other 2 attributes?
So the third one is all about
Okay.
strategic autonomy.
Okay.
Each country should have the freedom to choose its own partners.
So,
Development path.
yeah.
Without coercion or pressure from outside forces.
So it's like choosing who you want to buy your coffee from.
Yeah.
You want the freedom to pick the best option for you
Right.
without someone forcing you to buy from their shop,
Mm-hmm.
even if their coffee isn't that great.
Exactly. It's about having options
Yeah,
and making choices that align with your own interests.
I like it. Okay. And finally, the 4th attribute of equitable multipolarity.
Is a deliberate effort to reduce global inequality
Okay.
between rich and poor nations.
Because in the end, we're all interconnected, right?
Precisely.
Yeah.
Poverty and instability anywhere in the world can have ripple effects that impact all of us.
For sure.
So it's not just about altruism.
Right.
It's also about self-interest.
Yeah.
Creating a more equitable world benefits everyone in the long run.
Okay, so these four attributes paint a pretty compelling picture of what a more just and balanced world order could look like.
They do.
But let's get real for a second.
Oh,
Africa faces some serious challenges.
right, does.
I mean, we can't just snap our fingers
Right.
and make all of this happen.
You're right. It's not going to be easy.
No.
But that's what makes this moment so crucial.
Okay.
Dr. Saul argues that the current geopolitical shifts are creating a window of opportunity for Africa
Okay.
to leverage its strengths
Yeah.
and push for a more equitable world order.
So let's talk about those strengths.
Yep.
Africa has a young and growing population, vast natural resources,
Yeah.
a vibrant culture.
Uh-huh.
But there are also those internal challenges we talked about earlier, like the lack of a unified market,
Yeah.
political instability in some regions.
Dr. Saul acknowledges these challenges,
Okay.
but he also points to organizations like the African Union and initiatives like the African Continental Free Trade Area.
I've heard a lot about the African Continental Free Trade Area,
Yeah.
or AFCFTA.
The AFCFTA.
Can you explain what it is and why it's so important?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Think of it like the European Union, but for Africa.
Okay.
It's an agreement among 54 African countries
Wow.
to create a single market, which would eliminate tariffs and other trade barriers, making it easier for businesses to operate across borders.
So it's about creating a more integrated African economy,
Exactly.
which could attract foreign investment and boost intra-African trade.
Exactly, if implemented effectively.
Yeah.
The FCFTA has the potential to transform Africa's economic landscape
Right.
and empower African nations to compete more effectively on the global stage.
Okay. That makes sense. But I'm curious, wouldn't a unified Africa also face internal conflicts and power struggles? How do we address that?
That's a valid concern.
Yeah.
And it's one that Dr. Saul addresses in his paper.
Okay.
He emphasizes the importance of strong institutions, good governance, and a commitment to democracy and human rights.
Okay.
He also points to the role of civil society
Yeah.
in holding leaders accountable, ensuring that the benefits of economic growth are shared equitably.
So it's about finding a balance between unity and diversity,
Right.
recognizing the unique identities and interests of individual nations while working together for the collective good of the continent.
You've hit the nail on the head.
Okay.
It's a delicate balancing act,
It is.
but one that's essential for Africa's success
Yeah.
in this new era of multipolarity.
And speaking of multipolarity,
Yeah.
Dr. Saul uses this striking phrase
Oh, yeah.
to describe the current U.S.-China competition.
Okay.
He calls it a gigantic, unprecedented rivalry. Do you think that captures the scale of what's happening?
I think it does.
Yeah.
This isn't just like a minor squabble between nations. This is a fundamental reshaping of the global power structure, and it's happening at an unprecedented pace.
Yeah. And as we've been discussing, the stakes couldn't be higher for Africa.
It couldn't be.
So how can African nations navigate this rivalry and ensure that their interests are protected?
Right.
I mean, it's not like they can just ignore the U.S. or China.
Right.
They have to engage with both, right?
Absolutely. But that engagement needs to be strategic,
Okay.
not reactive. African nations need to define their own vision for the future
Right.
and then use their leverage to secure the best possible deals for their people.
So it's about playing the field, so to speak.
Yeah.
Leveraging competition between the U.S. and China to secure more favorable trade deals,
Right.
investment and technology transfer.
Exactly. And it requires a deep understanding
Okay.
of the strengths and weaknesses of both superpowers.
What do you mean?
Like, for example, China is known for its infrastructure prowess. So it might make sense for African nations to partner with China on projects like building roads, railways, and ports.
Okay.
But the U.S. has a strong track record in areas like technology and innovation. So African nations might seek partnerships with U.S. companies
Right.
in those sectors.
So it's about picking and choosing,
Yeah.
playing to each superpower's strengths while always prioritizing Africa's own long-term interests.
Well, you got it. It's about being smart, strategic, and assertive.
Yeah.
The old rules of the game are being rewritten,
Yeah.
and African nations need to be savvy players in this new era of multipolarity.
So this brings up another question that's been on my mind.
Okay.
We've been talking a lot about what African nations can do.
Right.
But what about us?
Yeah.
The global citizens listening in.
Right.
What role can we play in supporting a more just and equitable world order?
That's a fantastic question. And honestly, it's one that I've been asking myself as we've been going through all of this. I mean, it can feel overwhelming.
It can.
To think about these global power shifts and these huge geopolitical forces.
Yeah.
Like, what can one person actually do to make a difference?
Right. Well, it starts with something that seems really simple. Okay.
But is incredibly powerful.
Yeah.
Awareness.
Okay.
Educating ourselves about these complex global issues.
Right.
And specifically those that impact Africa is the first step.
I think a lot of people get their news from social media or quick headlines,
Right.
which don't always tell the whole story.
They don't.
So you're saying we need to dig deeper.
Exactly. Don't just accept the simplistic narratives that are often presented in the mainstream media.
Okay.
Seek out diverse perspectives. Read articles and books from African authors and scholars.
Okay.
Engage in respectful dialogue with people who have different viewpoints.
It's about challenging our own assumptions and biases and being open to learning from others.
Exactly.
But awareness is only the first step, right?
It is.
So what are some concrete actions we can take to support a more just and equitable world order?
Well, there's so many ways to get involved.
You what?
For one, we can support organizations that are working on the ground to empower communities in Africa.
Okay.
There are amazing grassroots groups working in areas like education, healthcare, sustainable development, human rights.
Yeah.
Even a small donation can make a big difference.
And what about our own governments?
Right.
I mean, we elect these leaders.
Yeah.
So we have a responsibility to hold them accountable.
Absolutely. Contact your elected officials.
Okay.
Let them know that you care about Africa. And that you want them to prioritize policies that promote global justice and sustainable development.
Right.
Advocate for fair trade policies that benefit African farmers and businesses. Push for increased foreign aid that's directed towards locally led initiatives.
So it's about using our voices and our votes to create change from the bottom up and the top down.
Exactly. And don't underestimate the power of your everyday choices.
Oh, like what?
Support businesses that are committed to ethical sourcing, fair labor practices, especially those that partner with African businesses and communities.
Wow. I'm realizing that there's so much we can do.
There is.
Even in our daily lives to support a more just and equitable world.
Yeah, and every action, no matter how small, contributes to building a better future.
That's good.
Dr. Saul's paper is really a call to action.
Yeah.
Not just for African nations, but for all of us.
Right.
It's a reminder that we're not just passive observers of history, but active participants in shaping the future.
That's such a powerful message.
It is.
The future of Africa is interconnected with the future of the entire world.
It is, and each of us has a role to play in building a world where every voice is heard and every nation has the opportunity to thrive.
This has been such an eye-opening deep dive.
It has.
Thanks to Dr. Saul's work and to your insights, I feel like I have a much better understanding of the challenges and opportunities facing Africa in this new era of multipolarity.
It's been a pleasure discussing this with you.
Likewise.
I hope our listeners feel inspired to take action.
Yes.
Become part of the solution.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Thanks for having me.
Until next time, keep questioning.
Keep learning.
Keep learning and keep pushing for a world where every voice matters.
Absolutely.
And remember, even small actions
can have a global impact.
You gotta have a global impact.